Anya, her brow furrowed in concentration, meticulously embroidered a delicate crimson thread into the intricate pattern of the baby blanket. Each stitch was a prayer, a whispered plea to the heavens. 10 years of yearning, of whispered prayers and stifled tears, had finally culminated in this miraculous pregnancy. The doctor had confirmed it, a healthy heartbeat, a tiny flicker of life within her. Anya, once a vibrant woman, her laughter echoing through the house, had become a shadow of her former self. The whispers of the village, the pitying glances, the constant refrain of "Baron Anya" from her mother-in-law, Mama Nkechi, had chipped away at her spirit. Mama Nkechi, a woman whose life revolved around the sanctity of motherhood and the continuity of the family line, viewed Anya with a mixture of disdain and disappointment. Chukwuma, her husband, a kind and patient man, tried his best to shield Anya from the relentless barbs of his mother. He worked tirelessly, his shoulders perpetually burdened by the weight of his family's expectations and the gnawing fear of disappointing his parents. He loved Anya deeply, his love a quiet, steady stream that flowed beneath the surface of their daily lives. But even his love couldn't entirely erase the pain of Anya's barren years. The arrival of Namdi, their son, was a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. The house, once filled with an oppressive silence, now echoed with the joyful sounds of a baby's laughter. Anya, reborn as a mother, poured all her love, all her suppressed yearning, into her son. He was her masterpiece, her redemption, her everything. Mama Nkechi, despite her initial reservations, was grudgingly charmed by the adorable baby. However, her joy was tempered by a growing unease. Anya's overprotectiveness, her fierce, almost possessive love for Namdi, began to worry her. Anya, Mama Nkechi would often say, her voice laced with concern, "You smother the boy. He needs to play with other children, to learn to be independent. You're making him clingy." Anya would dismiss her concerns with a dismissive wave of her hand. "He's just a baby, Mama. He needs his mother." Chukwuma, caught between his mother's anxieties and Anya's unwavering devotion to their son, found himself in a precarious position. He knew his mother's concerns were valid, yet he couldn't bring himself to criticize Anya. He understood the depth of her pain, the years of longing that had culminated in this fierce, almost desperate love for their son. As Namdi grew, his dependence on Anya intensified. He refused to be separated from her, his cries echoing through the house if she left the room for even a moment. He would cling to her skirts, his small fingers clutching tightly, his eyes wide with fear if she attempted to leave his side. Anya, oblivious to the potential dangers of this excessive attachment, indulged his every whim. She became his shadow, anticipating his needs, fulfilling his every desire before he even voiced them. Chukwuma watched with growing unease as their son's behavior became increasingly erratic. Namdi's tantrums grew more frequent and violent, his jealousy of any attention directed towards his father becoming palpable. He would often throw tantrums, screaming and kicking, if Chukwuma tried to spend time with Anya. "Anya, this isn't normal," Chukwuma pleaded one evening, his voice weary. "He's becoming possessive." Anya scoffed. "He's just a child, Chukwuma. He loves me. That's all." But Chukwuma knew it was more than just love. It was a suffocating, all-consuming obsession, a crimson thread that bound Namdi to Anya with an unnatural intensity. Anya, in her attempt to create a perfect world for her son, inadvertently cultivated the seeds of his obsession. She shielded him from the harsh realities of life, from the inevitable disappointments and setbacks that are a part of growing up. She saw every tantrum, every act of defiance, as a cry for her love and attention, never realizing that she was inadvertently reinforcing his dependence. Namdi, deprived of the opportunity to explore his own individuality, to develop his own interests and friendships, became increasingly reliant on his mother for emotional validation. He sought her approval in every action, every thought, every word. Their bond, once a source of comfort and joy, began to take on a disturbingly possessive edge. Namdi would often invade Anya's privacy, barging into the bathroom while she showered, demanding her attention even during her private moments. Anya, blinded by her love, dismissed these incidents as harmless displays of affection. "He's just curious," she would reassure herself, her heart swelling with pride at his unwavering devotion. As Namdi entered adolescence, the crimson thread that bound him to his mother began to unravel in alarming ways. His jealousy transformed into a simmering rage, directed not just towards his father, but towards any male who dared to show Anya even the slightest attention. His academic performance plummeted. He lost interest in his studies, his focus solely on his mother, his every thought consumed by her. He would spend hours observing her, memorizing her every move, every gesture, every fleeting expression. Anya, oblivious to the growing darkness within her son, continued to indulge his every whim. She dismissed his teacher's concerns about his disruptive behavior in class, his aggressive outbursts, his increasing isolation from his peers. "He's just a misunderstood genius," she would insist, her voice laced with defiance. Chukwuma, however, was terrified. He saw the storm brewing within their son, the simmering rage that threatened to consume them all. He tried to intervene, to set boundaries, to instill some sense of discipline in their son. But his efforts were met with fierce resistance from Anya, who saw his attempts as an attack on her beloved son. One evening, while Anya was preparing dinner, Namdi entered the kitchen, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. He handed her a small, intricately carved wooden box. "For you, Mama," he said, his voice a low, husky whisper. Anya's heart fluttered. "Oh, Namdi, it's beautiful," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a single, crimson rose. Namdi watched her closely, his eyes searching for her reaction. Anya, her heart pounding, felt a strange mixture of emotions, pride, affection, and a fleeting sense of unease. It's perfect, Namdi," she whispered, her voice catching. Namdi smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a chill down Anya's spine. "I made it for you, Mama," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just for you." Anya, oblivious to the ominous undercurrents, smiled back, her heart overflowing with love for her son. She had no idea that this seemingly innocent gesture was a chilling manifestation of his growing obsession. As the years passed, Namdi's obsession grew more intense, more insidious. He would follow Anya everywhere, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, watching for any potential rivals. He would erupt in fits of jealousy if she spoke to another man, his anger a terrifying force that left Anya trembling with fear. Chukwuma, witnessing his son's descent into madness, felt a wave of despair wash over him. He tried to reason with Anya, to convince her of the gravity of the situation, but his words fell on deaf ears. Anya, blinded by her love, refused to acknowledge the danger. "He's just a passionate young man," she would insist, her voice strained. "He needs to learn to control his emotions." But Chukwuma knew that this was no mere emotional outburst. This was a deep-seated, all-consuming obsession, a crimson thread that was slowly choking the life out of their family. One evening, while Anya was attending a community meeting, Namdi, consumed by a fit of jealousy, confronted Mr. Obi, their elderly neighbor, who had been seen talking to Anya earlier that day. The confrontation turned violent, Namdi. "Certainly, let's continue expanding the crimson thread through each chapter, exploring the deepening complexities of the mother-son relationship and the escalating tension." Namdi, consumed by a fit of jealousy, confronted Mr. Obi, their elderly neighbor, who had been seen talking to Anya earlier that day. The confrontation turned violent, Namdi shoving Mr. Obi to the ground with such force that the old man lay motionless on the pavement. The village was thrown into a state of shock. Namdi, usually a quiet and withdrawn boy, had become a volatile, unpredictable force. Fear and suspicion began to creep into the hearts of the villagers. They whispered amongst themselves, their voices hushed, their eyes filled with apprehension. Anya, upon hearing the news, was initially dismissive. "He's just a boy," she declared, her voice trembling slightly. "He didn't mean to hurt him." But the reality of the situation was slowly sinking in. The incident with Mr. Obi was not an isolated event. It was a chilling manifestation of a deep-seated, disturbing obsession. Chukwuma, his face pale with fear, knew they had to act. He realized that his wife, blinded by her love, was incapable of seeing the danger. He knew he had to protect his wife, protect his son, and protect their family from the escalating chaos. Chukwuma, determined to break the suffocating grip of Namdi's obsession, decided to send him away to boarding school. He hoped that the separation would provide Namdi with some much-needed perspective, an opportunity to break free from the suffocating grip of his mother's love. Anya, predictably, was devastated. She pleaded with Chukwuma to reconsider, her voice filled with despair. "He'll be lonely, Chukwuma. He won't be able to survive without me." Chukwuma, his heart aching for his wife, remained firm. "This is for the best, Anya. For both of you." Namdi, upon hearing the news, erupted in a furious rage. He screamed and threw things, his anger a terrifying force that shook the very foundations of their home. He refused to leave, clinging to his mother, his grip tightening with each passing moment. Anya, torn between her love for her son and her husband's unwavering resolve, finally relented. She watched as her son, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and despair, was driven away in the school bus. The silence that followed was deafening. The house, once filled with the sounds of Namdi's laughter, now echoed with an eerie emptiness. Anya, bereft and heartbroken, retreated to her room, her tears a silent testament to the pain of separation. The initial period of separation was excruciating for both Anya and Namdi. Anya spent her days staring out the window, her mind constantly filled with thoughts of her son. She received letters from him every week, each letter filled with passionate declarations of love and longing. Namdi, meanwhile, struggled to adapt to the rigid structure of boarding school. He missed his mother desperately, his loneliness a constant, gnawing ache. He found solace in his studies, pouring all his emotions into his academic work, his grades soaring to unprecedented heights. However, the separation did not break the hold of his obsession. His letters to his mother became increasingly intense, filled with vivid descriptions of his dreams, his fantasies, all centering around his mother. He wrote of his longing to hold her, to feel her skin against his, to lose himself in her embrace. Anya, despite her initial reservations, found herself drawn to these passionate letters. They filled a void in her life, a void that had been created by her son's absence. She cherished every word, every carefully crafted sentence, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and a disturbing sense of unease. As the months passed, Namdi's letters became more frequent, more intense. He wrote of his dreams, of a life where they could be together, free from the constraints of societal norms, free from the judgment of others. He wrote of a love that transcended the boundaries of blood, a love that was both sacred and forbidden. Anya, initially repelled by the intensity of his words, found herself strangely drawn to them. They stirred something within her, a forbidden longing, a yearning for a connection that was both intimate and taboo. She began to fantasize about their reunion, imagining their embrace, the warmth of his body against hers, the intensity of his gaze. These fantasies, once fleeting and fleeting, began to consume her, their grip tightening with each passing day. Chukwuma, observing his wife's growing obsession with her son's letters, felt a wave of dread wash over him. He saw the same dangerous patterns repeating themselves, the same insidious erosion of boundaries. He tried to intervene, to warn Anya of the dangers of indulging in these fantasies. "Anya," he pleaded, his voice filled with urgency, "you're feeding this obsession. You need to stop." But Anya, lost in a haze of longing and forbidden desires, refused to listen. She saw his warnings as an intrusion, a threat to the fragile connection she had maintained with her son. The day of Namdi's return from boarding school was a mixture of joy and apprehension. Anya, her heart pounding with anticipation, spent the entire day preparing for his arrival. She decorated the house with flowers, baked his favorite cake, and laid out his favorite clothes. Namdi, taller and more mature, stepped off the bus, his eyes scanning the crowd for his mother. When he saw her, his face lit up with a mixture of joy and something else, something darker, something that sent a shiver down Anya's spine. The reunion was passionate, overwhelming. Namdi showered his mother with affection, his embrace tight, his eyes burning with an intensity that left Anya breathless. That night, as they sat together in the living room, Anya felt a strange sense of unease. Namdi, his eyes fixed on her, spoke of his time at boarding school, his voice low and intense. He described his dreams, his fantasies, his longing for her, his words laced with a disturbing intensity. Anya, her heart pounding, felt a strange sense of exhilaration, a forbidden thrill that sent a shiver down her spine. She knew she should be alarmed, should pull away, but she found herself drawn to the intensity of his gaze, the raw, unfiltered emotion in his voice. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Namdi, having returned home, began to exert his influence over his mother. He subtly manipulated her, playing on her fears and insecurities, exploiting her longing for his affection. He would often appear in her room unexpectedly, his eyes filled with a predatory glint. He would touch her, his hands lingering on her skin, his touch sending shivers down her spine. Anya, caught in the intoxicating web of his affection, found herself increasingly drawn to him. She found herself craving his touch, his attention, his unwavering devotion. The boundaries that had once existed between them began to blur, to dissolve, until they were barely discernible. Chukwuma, witnessing the insidious erosion of their family, felt a wave of despair wash over him. He tried to intervene, to set boundaries, to protect his wife from the suffocating grip of her son's obsession. Anya, he pleaded, his voice trembling with fear, you need to stop this. You're playing with fire. But Anya, blinded by her love, refused to listen. She saw Chukwuma's warnings as an act of jealousy, a desperate attempt to control her. She believed that she and her son had a special bond, a connection that transcended the ordinary. One evening, while Chukwuma was away on a business trip, Namdi, emboldened by his mother's growing acquiescence, made his move. He approached Anya, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "Mama," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion, "I need you." Anya, her heart pounding, felt a strange sense of anticipation, a forbidden thrill that sent a shiver down her spine. She looked into his eyes, her gaze drawn to the intensity of his emotion, the raw, unfiltered desire that burned within him. Namdi moved closer, his hand reaching out to touch her face, his fingers tracing the contours of her cheek. Anya, her breath catching in her throat, felt a strange sense of surrender, a willingness to succumb to the intoxicating pull of his desire. As Namdi leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, Anya closed her eyes, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, fear, excitement, a forbidden sense of liberation. The kiss, when it came, was a whirlwind of emotions, passion, desperation, a disturbing sense of wrongness. Anya, caught in the intoxicating grip of his embrace, lost herself in the moment, her inhibitions fading away. The kiss shattered the fragile peace that had existed within their home. Anya, consumed by a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, guilt, shame, and a terrifying sense of exhilaration, retreated to her room, her mind reeling from the events of the evening. She knew she had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. But the memory of Namdi's touch, the intensity of his gaze, haunted her. She found herself craving the forbidden, the thrill of the taboo. The following days were a blur of conflicting emotions. Anya tried to suppress the memory of the kiss, to convince herself that it was a mistake, a momentary lapse of judgment. But the memory lingered, a persistent shadow that cast a long shadow over her life. Namdi, emboldened by their transgression, became more possessive, more demanding. He sought her out constantly, his eyes burning with a possessive intensity. He would touch her, his hands lingering on her skin, his gaze lingering on her lips, leaving Anya breathless with a mixture of fear and forbidden desire. Anya, caught in the intoxicating web of his affection, found herself increasingly drawn to him. She craved his touch, his attention, the intoxicating thrill of their forbidden love. The line between mother and son had vanished, replaced by a dangerous, all-consuming passion. Chukwuma, sensing the shift in the dynamics within their home, grew increasingly concerned. He noticed the subtle changes in Anya's behavior, the guarded glances, the fleeting moments of intimacy that seemed to pass between her and their son. He tried to talk to Anya, to express his concerns, but his words fell on deaf ears. Anya, consumed by her own desires, was incapable of seeing the danger. She dismissed his concerns as unfounded jealousy, as an attempt to control her. As their clandestine relationship deepened, Anya began to neglect her duties as a wife. She spent less and less time with Chukwuma, her attention focused solely on her son. She found excuses to avoid his company, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of Namdi, his touch, his kisses. Chukwuma, feeling increasingly isolated and neglected, retreated into himself. He spent more time at work, his evenings filled with a loneliness that he had never experienced before. He watched helplessly as his wife, the woman he loved, drifted further and further away, ensnared in the suffocating grip of her son's obsession. The village, meanwhile, began to whisper. They noticed the growing distance between Anya and Chukwuma, the strained silences that hung heavy in the air. They noticed the way Namdi clung to his mother, his possessiveness becoming increasingly evident. Whispers of scandal began to circulate, fueled by the villagers' morbid curiosity and the growing unease that permeated the atmosphere. Anya, oblivious to the whispers, continued to indulge in her forbidden love, her world shrinking to the confines of her own desires. One evening, while Chukwuma was away on a business trip, Anya and Namdi decided to spend the night together. They locked the doors, barricading themselves from the outside world, their world shrinking to the confines of their own desires. They spent the night in each other's arms, their bodies entwined, their passion consuming them. Anya, lost in the intoxicating haze of their forbidden love, felt a strange sense of liberation, a sense of freedom from the constraints of societal norms, from the judgment of others. But the morning brought with it a wave of guilt and remorse. Anya awoke to the chilling realization of what she had done. She had betrayed her husband, her marriage, her own morality. She looked at Namdi, who was sleeping peacefully beside her, and a wave of fear washed over her. She realized that she had unleashed a force that she could no longer control. The crimson thread that bound them together had become a noose, tightening around her neck, threatening to suffocate her. Anya, consumed by guilt and fear, decided to end the affair. She knew it was the only way to save herself, to save her marriage, to save her sanity. She tried to distance herself from Namdi, to re-establish the boundaries that had been so cruelly violated. But Namdi, fueled by his own desires, refused to let go. He clung to her, his possessiveness intensifying with each passing day. He would follow her around the house, his eyes burning with a possessive intensity. He would touch her, his hands lingering on her skin, his gaze lingering on her lips, leaving Anya breathless with a mixture of fear and forbidden desire. Anya, weakened by guilt and fear, found herself increasingly drawn to him. She craved the comfort of his touch, the intensity of his gaze, the forbidden thrill of their illicit affair. One evening, while Chukwuma was entertaining guests in the living room, Namdi, his eyes filled with a predatory glint, cornered Anya in the kitchen. "You can't leave me, Mama," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. "You belong to me." Anya, terrified by the intensity of his gaze, tried to pull away, but Namdi held her captive, his grip tightening around her wrist. "You're mine," he repeated, his voice a low growl. "Only mine." Anya, her heart pounding with fear, felt a wave of panic wash over her. She realized that she had unleashed a monster, a creature of her own making. The crimson thread that bound them together had become a noose, tightening around her neck, threatening to suffocate her. Anya, trapped in the suffocating grip of her son's obsession, felt a sense of despair creeping over her. She knew she had to escape, to break free from the suffocating grip of the crimson thread that bound her to her son. She reached out to Chukwuma, her voice trembling with fear. She confessed everything, the illicit affair, the growing danger that threatened to consume them all. Chukwuma, his heart shattered, listened in stunned silence. He had suspected something was wrong, but the truth was far more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. He felt a wave of anger, of betrayal, wash over him. But more than anything, he felt a profound sense of pity for his wife, for his son, for the family that had been irrevocably shattered by this forbidden love. He knew they had to leave, to escape the suffocating grip of Namdi's obsession. He knew they had to find a way to break free from the crimson thread that bound them to this house, to this life, to this tragic, self-destructive love. Chukwuma, determined to protect his wife and himself from the escalating danger, made plans to leave. He sold their property, packed their belongings, and made arrangements for their departure. Namdi, sensing the impending departure, became increasingly erratic. He would follow his mother everywhere, his eyes filled with a desperate intensity. He would try to sabotage their plans, his rage a terrifying force that threatened to consume them all. Anya, torn between her love for her son and the desperate need to escape, felt a sense of despair creeping over her. She knew she was leaving a part of herself behind, a part that was irrevocably bound to this house, to this life, to the son she had loved too much. The day of their departure finally arrived. Chukwuma, his face grim, helped Anya load the last of their belongings into the car. Namdi, his face contorted with rage, watched from the window, his eyes filled with a chilling intensity. As they drove away, Anya looked back at the house, her heart heavy with a mixture of grief and relief. She knew she was leaving a part of herself behind, a part that was irrevocably bound to this house, to this life, to the son she had loved too much. Anya and Chukwuma left their home behind, leaving behind the ghosts of their past, the echoes of their forbidden love. They moved to a distant city, hoping to escape the suffocating grip of Namdi's obsession. But they could not escape the shadow of the past. The memories of their forbidden love continued to haunt them, their sleep disturbed by nightmares, their days filled with a lingering sense of dread. Anya, haunted by the memory of her son's eyes, his gaze filled with a possessive intensity, struggled to move on. She tried to rebuild her life, to reconnect with her husband, but the shadow of their past continued to linger, a constant reminder of the love that had consumed them, the love that had almost destroyed them. Chukwuma, despite his efforts to rebuild their lives, could not escape the pain of betrayal, the fear that the crimson thread that had bound them to their son would continue to haunt them, a constant reminder of the love that had almost consumed them. They lived in a state of perpetual fear, their lives forever altered by the crimson thread that had bound them to their son, a thread that continued to weave its way into their lives, a constant reminder of the love that. Years passed. Anya and Chukwuma, though they had built a new life for themselves, never truly escaped the shadow of their past. The memory of Namdi, his eyes filled with a chilling intensity, continued to haunt them. They received occasional letters from Namdi, each letter filled with a mixture of anger and longing. He wrote of his loneliness, his despair, his yearning for his mother's love. Anya, her heart torn, would often respond, her letters filled with a mixture of guilt and affection. Chukwuma, witnessing his wife's continued correspondence with their son, felt a wave of despair wash over him. He knew that these letters were only fueling Namdi's obsession, keeping the flame of his dangerous love alive. He tried to intervene,